Okay, 7th grade. Today we are on page 26 in our writing packet. So we skipped ahead last week a little bit just because we had a lesson that was a duplicate from the reading packet. So this is where we're picking up at today. So we're on page 26, like I said, doing the journal entry. As always, the journal entry is 5 to 7 sentences, which is just the same as one paragraph. So it says, do you think students should be able to choose what they want to learn about? Why or why not? Explain your opinion using reasons and examples. So, excuse me. So with this, you need to look at like school-related topics, like do you think students should be able to choose what they want to learn about? Explain why you think that they should or why you think that they shouldn't, and then give your reasoning on why you believe that. So you can't just say, oh yeah, they should be able to choose what they want to learn about because I said so. That's not a reason. So you need to give valid reasons on why you believe that. So that's 5 to 7 sentences. As always, let's take a look at page 27. So just the same as we usually do, we're going to go through this lesson right here at the top of page 27, and then we'll do the guided practice together at the bottom of this page, and then you guys will do page 28 on your own. So today we've been talking a lot about different sentence types and like how that makes your writing more interesting and not so like robotic and basic sounding. So today we're talking about the other side of that, which is eliminating wordiness and redundancy. So wordiness is just when there's like a lot of unnecessary words in the sentence or paragraph, whatever the situation is. And then redundancy is like repeating things over and over again. If something's redundant, it's being repeated. And that would be like when we talked about connotations, redundancy is a negative connotation for repetition. So redundancy, you don't want to be redundant, okay? So it says, good writers know that every word counts. So when you're revising your writing, this lesson's going to be super simple today. When you're revising your writing, try to use fewer words. So you're going to edit your writing, because when we did our argumentative essays, we did a little bit of editing and peer review and all of that. So one of the things you could look at in the future with peer review is eliminating unnecessary words and phrases. So don't delete phrases that add meaning, because if it matters to the sentence, you don't want to delete it, okay? So the wordy version of the sentence would say, this paper, which y'all know how much I hate that, this paper will focus on the Great Migration and the reason why it had a huge impact on urban life in the United States. Well, first of all, I know I talked to several, maybe all of you, about how I hate when anyone starts with their papers with this paper or in this paper I'll talk about or I'm going to talk about, because we already know you're writing a paper because we're reading it. So you don't have to tell us that you're writing a paper because we already know. So you just take that out. And then also just an unnecessary thing is to say in the reason why, because when you give us the reason, we already know you've given us the reason. So instead of saying, this paper will focus on the Great Migration and the reasons why it had a huge impact on urban life in the United States, the concise version of that would be, the Great Migration had a huge impact on urban life in the United States. It just simples it down a little bit, makes it a little bit easier to understand, more concise, as they like to call it. Just takes out those unnecessary words that don't add meaning. The second thing says use one word in place of a phrase. So this is just to bring, obviously a lot of the times we're trying to increase that word count when we're writing a paper, because we're just trying to meet that word count that your teacher or your professor or whatever has given you. So in the first sentence, it says, during the time that World War I broke out, factories in northern cities had a need for more workers. So instead of saying during the time that, you could say when World War I broke out, because it's saying the same thing, but it's just a little bit more simple and concise. And then factories in northern cities needed more workers. So instead of saying had a need for, you can say needed. Okay, none of these are grammatically incorrect or anything like that. It just sounds a little bit better when you say it with less wordiness. So then also we're going to talk about redundancy, which, as I said, which is just repeating words and phrases, repeat ideas. It doesn't have to be repeated word for word. It's just repeating the same ideas over and over again. Okay? So the repetitious or redundant version is by the end of 1919, 1 million African Americans had left, leaving the South for cities and urban areas like Chicago, New York, and Detroit. So had left and leaving mean the same exact thing. So it's not necessary to have both of those in there. Okay? Then cities and urban areas also mean the same thing. It's not necessary to have both of those in there. So they changed it to say by the end of 1919, 1 million African Americans had left. They just took out leaving. The South for cities, they took out urban areas like Chicago, New York, and Detroit. So it's just taking out things that mean the same exact thing, because we already know what you're trying to say. You don't have to tell us twice. So now what we're going to do here is we're going to revise each sentence to eliminate wordiness and repeated ideas. So the hint says, ask yourself, which words can I delete without changing the main idea? Which phrases can I replace with just one word? So this one says, the Great Migration was the largest, biggest mass movement of people in history. Now take a minute here and think, are we seeing things repeated, or are we seeing things just like too much wordiness, too many words? Well, we see a little bit of repetition here, right? With largest and biggest. Those mean the same thing, right? So we can just choose one of them. We're just going to go ahead and go with the first. So we would say the Great Migration, let me make this text a little bit smaller, was the largest mass movement of people, in U.S. history. So we're just taking out, it's really not complicated. We don't want to overcomplicate it. We're just taking out one of those words that means the same thing, because we already know that largest and biggest mean the same thing. We don't need you to tell us twice. So in the early 1900s, at the turn of the century, most African Americans lived in the South. Now here you need to know what turn of the century means. So turn of the century would be when you go, like right now we're in the 2000s, right? When we go to like, I guess it would be like 21,000. A better example would be like 1800 to 1900. That might give it away a little bit, or 1900 to 2000, that's the turn of the century. So if it says in the early 1900s at the turn of the century, well, then at the early 1900s would be the turn of the century. So saying early 1900s is the same thing as saying turn of the century. So that is getting rid of redundancy. So we're just going to keep the first thing just like we did the last time and eliminate the second thing. So in the early 1900s, most African Americans lived in the South. So we're just eliminating that second redundant explanation of the early 1900s. Last one, because they worked as sharecroppers, farming the land as part of the sharecropper system. So here, it's kind of a case of both redundancy and wordiness, right? Because we see they worked as sharecroppers farming the land as part of the sharecropper system. Well, if they're sharecroppers, we already know that they're part of the sharecropper system, right? But it's not exactly repeating it right after, but here it is repeating it kind of word for word, right? So it would work just the same if we said they worked as sharecroppers farming the land. We know that they're sharecroppers, so we know they're part of the sharecropper system. This is very, very simple. We don't want to overcomplicate this. So you guys are going to do page 28 on your own today. And then after you do page 28, you're good for today. Make sure it's Friday, so make sure you're sending me those images of your finished work if you want to receive that highly engaged level for grading this quarter, because I do have to submit grades this week. So make sure, or not this week, but next week. So make sure you guys do send me those pictures by probably, what's today, the 22nd, probably by Monday of next week from this week. And then next week, I'll need you guys to send them to me day by day. But if you guys have any questions, I'll be available during office hours. So just let me know if you need anything.